Today, we're leaving the bluegrasses of Kentucky for the Rocky Mountains of Colorado, and we're taking 3 rolls of Portra 400 with us, along with my Contax G1. Welcome back to Overexposed, where sometimes I like to sleep in the back of my Prius, pee in a water bottle, and watch Dragon Ball Z. So I've been planning this trip to Colorado for quite some time, and to be frank, it's a trip that I've wanted to take for most of my adult life. I'm a public defender, and it's really hard for me to miss an entire week of work. So I had to do my district court docket on Monday in Clay County District Court, filled up my water bottles, gathered my clothes and food and whatnot, and got my car completely ready to go. I even mowed my yard, all in preparation of getting ready to leave after court on Monday. So after court was over on Monday, I stripped down in the back of my car, put on some more casual clothes, and headed towards St. Louis, which was where my first stop would be. So I slept in my car that night and then decided I was going to drive all the way across Kansas and into Colorado. But on my way through Kansas, I was going to stop at every important photography location. Being that there were no important photography destinations in Kansas, I stopped once for gas and then continued on into Colorado. As I crossed the border from Kansas into Colorado, it wasn't long before on the horizon I could see the little tops of the mountains starting to appear on the horizon. And that's when the real sense of adventure started to kick in. I can honestly say that I am hardly ever happier in my life than when I'm on my way somewhere new. This is the first time I've been to Colorado. It's that exhilaration, getting to see new things, getting to be out on the road, and frankly, to not be bound by my work obligations. I'm a public defender, the job's really hard, hundreds and hundreds of clients, really important cases, death penalty cases, murder cases, all this terrible stuff, right? And just to be able to get away for a few days, there's no feeling like it. After a combined 24 hours of driving, I made my way into Colorado. And before long, I arrived at Estes Park, which was the entry into Rocky Mountain National Park that I was going to take. So I went straight away, went to the visitor center, and bought my park pass so I could come and go in the park as I pleased. After getting my park pass, I noticed that the sun was starting to kind of go behind the mountains, and we were on our way to a decent sunset. There were a few clouds in the sky. So I got back in the Prius, and I headed up the mountains. Didn't really know, hadn't planned on being able to use any of this day. I got on a road, looked like it was generally going up inside the national park, and made my way around the mountains. Turns out that I made a pretty good choice, and there were all manner of scenic overlooks and pullouts along the way up there. Continued on my way, jumping out and taking pictures furiously as the light changed and the sun continued to go down. Check out these photos. When I made my way up to the top to an honest-to-God alpine region, right? Like, it's July, right? I took this trip in July, and there's still snow on the mountain. It was getting dark and it had been a long day of driving, so I found my spot for the night, a little parking lot near the visitor center that I don't know if we're allowed to camp in, and started making camp for the night. Having left Eastern time and now I was on Mountain time, by the time 8 o'clock rolled around, 9 o'clock, I was more than ready for bed. So I had an early night. That way the next morning I could get out, beat the crowds, and hit the trails early. The trail that I'd selected to go on for the next day was a trail called the Dream Lake Trail. And it's one of the alpine lakes in the Rocky Mountains National Park. It's not a terribly long hike. I want to say 2.5 miles, something like that. But it's a really cool place to watch the sunrise. Not because you're actually watching the sunrise, but because you're seeing the warm light on this really rocky face of the mountains. I was up the next morning by probably 4 o'clock, and I was easily on the trail hiking by 5. On the trail, it was pitch black dark, and as I set out hiking on the trail, I was being guided only by the light coming out of the end of my cell phone camera. In my infinite preparedness, I didn't have a headlamp or a flashlight, so here we were, relegated to using the cell phone line. Eventually, though, it didn't take long before I started to notice that there was just a little amber reddish color starting to appear off on the horizon. And it was at this point that I was able to start to appreciate the beauty of the place that I was in. And while I'd done the math in the car the night before, this is where I kind of was confronted with a choice, because there were actually a series of lakes. There were actually 3. It started making me a little bit panicky. Seeing that the sky was already changing colors and the light levels were increasing, I was starting to get worried that I was gonna miss sun. So I looked at the numbers again, realized that sunrise was still supposed to be 30 or 40 minutes away. I dropped it into gear and really tried to make my way up the trail. And I made it to the famous Dream Lake just in time. And I think I used all of the rest of my first roll of Portra right here. After finishing up with the sunrise at Dream Lake, I put a new roll of Portra 400 in my camera, and then I was confronted with what to do next, right? I'd planned to do Dream Lake, I had some things planned for that evening, really hadn't thought about what to do next. So I saw some people hiking on up the trail, and I thought, you know what, I'm gonna continue up the trail as well. There was just one little problem, and this was something I hadn't planned for. Big shock that I didn't plan for something. But I was starting to get a dull headache. Me being a mountain man in eastern Kentucky plainly is not the same thing as being a mountaineer in Colorado. I think our mountains here at their maximum ebb are like 2,500, 2,800 feet, and at this point I'm probably well over 11,000 or 12,000 feet. So I was getting a little bit of altitude sickness. And without spoiling the end of the video, let's just say it wouldn't be the last time. But I digress. I continued up the trail and snapped some really cool photos of this wonderful creek. And while we'd already had sunrise proper, the morning light was just absolutely magical at this point. And these are the moments, at least for me, where I really feel alive. I really feel like I'm doing something. Think back to my day job and how difficult it is and how it's kind of a slog. And I'm able to go up here in these mountains and just be so free. But I was just at my maximum ebb. I was so happy. As I continued up the trail, I saw this like gray water, right? This water that was like a chalky gray. I mean, it looked like something out of Final Fantasy. And I had to stop there for a moment. I put my hands in the water and I scooped the water out, and I could see the particulate in the water. The water was so cold and so clear, but it had this gray haze to it. Take a look at some of these photos to see what I mean. After that, it was later in the day, so I decided to make my way back down the mountain. And after I got back down, kind of the strangest thing happened. It was a really weird kind of sensation that came over me. I was really tired and honestly thought I was getting sick. So there's a really big parking lot in Estes Park near the McDonald's. There were quite a few folks already in the parking lot by the McDonald's. Subarus and van life, like conversions in the parking lot, so lots of folks doing this. But I parked my Prius in that parking lot, climbed in the back of the car, and decided to take a nap. I really wasn't feeling all that well. And it hadn't occurred to me that it was altitude sickness. After taking a few-hour nap in the parking lot of the McDonald's like a homeless person, I got up and decided it's time to go get some pizza. And at that point, I used the One Bite app. It's Dave Portnoy's app that helps you find and rate pizza places to find a pizza for dinner. And man, I don't know if I was just really hungry because I didn't eat like a substantial meal after the hike, or that it was really the best pizza that I've ever had. But I went to Antonio's Real New York Pizza in Estes Park, and I swear to God, in my review on the One Bite app, you can see a 9.0, right? I'll show it on the video. The best pizza that I've ever had. Super, super good. So if you're in Estes Park, you want good pizza, Antonio's, that's the place to be. After having the pizza, it was time to go make camp for the night. After making camp, went to the back of my car, watched some Dragon Ball Super, and went to bed. The next morning, I decided to do some more sunrise photography, so I was up and at it bright and early. If I have one prevailing memory of that morning taking those sunrise photos, is that I was really, really freaking cold. I was in shorts, and it was like freaking 30 degrees, and the wind was blowing like 1,000 miles an hour, and I thought I was gonna freeze to death. So I was really suffering from my art in these photos. So my next goal on this trip was to go to Black Canyon of the Gunnison National Park. Not as widely known as the Rocky Mountains National Park, but it's a place that I've wanted to go for a while anyway. I thought the pictures that come out of this place are really cool. But it also would give me a unique opportunity to drive most of the way across the state. Decided to take that day, allocate that day to driving to Black Canyon of the Gunnison, and let me tell you, what an amazing drive that was. I went over mountains and streams and saw old buildings, dirt roads and cows and farms and more mountains and more streams and more bridges. Just an absolutely delightful day. I loved my drive across the state. Eventually, at about 2 o'clock, I made my way to Black Canyon of the Gunnison. I bought my visitor's pass there and went inside. And for your own edification, there really isn't that much to do there. Black Canyon of the Gunnison, at least from what I could see, consisted mainly of this really, really beautiful canyon, and the views are fantastic, but it's mostly just a road and some photo opportunities. There isn't any real consequential hiking, at least that I could see. So Black Canyon of the Gunnison offered some really, really cool photos. Check these out. As I was in Black Canyon of the Gunnison National Park, the weather conditions started to change pretty dramatically. I could see a huge storm system moving in and eventually a few drops of rain. So with that kind of foiling any prospect of capturing sunset, which was what my goal was, I was kind of positioning myself for sunset photos in Black Canyon, I decided to leave the park and go on to my next destination. And after that, I made my way back to near Leadville, Colorado, and it was time for dinner again, and the weather was just dreadful at this point. And I made my way into a Subway. And I know you guys are probably judging me pretty hard, but I'm not a foodie. I don't go to these places and try to eat really expensive bougie food. That's not what I'm into. But anyway, had Subway, found my camp spot for the night, and tucked in for an early bedtime. The next morning was poised to be my most consequential day of the trip yet, and that was because I had decided that I was going to hike Mount Elbert in Colorado, which, if you didn't know, is the highest mountain in the contiguous U.S. That's basically excluding all the big crap that's in Alaska. But anyway, I hadn't really been working out. I'd been running very, very infrequently, so I wasn't in the greatest fitness setting into this journey. So the Mount Elbert Trail is, especially for somebody who hasn't been running all that much, a pretty difficult trail, right? I think of the 14ers in Colorado, it's not like the worst. There's a lot more challenging trails than this one, but it's a 10-mile hike, 5,000 feet of elevation gain. So trail's nothing to sleep on. And it's also worth considering that this is done at elevation, right? This is a 14er. It's 14,400, 14,500 feet tall, really big, really difficult mountain. So it was going to be a really challenging day. Woke up the next morning, checked the weather, and thankfully the rain had stopped. It was still wet from raining the day before, and they were giving rain in the afternoon. Looks like I was going to have a really nice window to try to hike Mount Elbert. So the next morning, loaded up my stuff, fruit snacks, crackers, water bottles, soda, like all the things that I would need for freaking 10 miles of hiking. Once again, it was really dark when I got on the trail, but the parking lot was full. So there were lots of other folks with the same idea as me, but getting there early, I got a spot and I was able to get on the trail. And that morning, as the sun started to rise, I was treated to some of the most beautiful views that I've ever saw. Hiking a mountain like this is such an enjoyable experience because you meet so many cool people on the trail. And I think that hiking kind of self-selects cool people, right? You're kind of ambitious people, so these are reasonably successful people from other walks of life. Just a really fun time getting to know a lot of the folks. I met a teacher from Hawaii. I met a guy from North Carolina who was super cool. I met a Park Service worker who was working on a bit of the trail. He had spent some time in Moorhead, Kentucky. Lots of really cool folks on the trail with really cool stories. But as I continued up the mountain, I was getting tired. So just taking a little bit of a breather here. Beautiful morning here on Mount Elbert. Sitting at about 13,000 feet. I've got about a mile to go before I get to the summit. Trouble is, the whole mile is basically on a 45-degree angle uphill, so could be a lengthy process. Like I said, it's about 7:30, threat of rain at noon, so better get moving, but I'll keep you guys updated. These hillbilly lungs are not properly acclimated. Pretty soon, as we got close to the summit, the rain started, and then the rain turned into snow. In July. Let's record that for the video. So I made it a couple hundred feet from the summit, and then I stopped for a snack. Looking back on my hike of Mount Elbert, most of my memories are very fuzzy. I said this to my mom. It's almost like my brain was covered in dryer lint. At 14,000 plus feet, altitude sickness was a real problem. I thought I had it earlier in the week, but at this point my head is hurting. I'm getting sick to my stomach. I want to puke. I'm exhausted. And couple that with the rain and the snow and being cold and wet, it was really hard. It was really hard, and perhaps I was a little underprepared. After finishing up with the hike, and turned around, made my way back down the mountain, and it was all but basically a survival situation. It rained, and it rained, and it rained, and it rained all the way down the mountain. I was soaked to the bone, and I was bitterly cold. And in fact, some of my images have water damage because the water soaked through my backpack and got into one of my rolls of film. Pretty soon though, much to my relief, I was back in my car, and I was impossibly tired. I'd worn jeans on the trip, and at this point the jeans were completely stuck to my legs. They were soaking wet. My shirt was soaking wet, my jacket was soaking wet, and it was like 35 degrees, 37 degrees, like really cold. And I just rolled around in the back of my car until I could get my jeans off and put some dry clothes on. After getting some dry clothes on, I had one thing on my mind, and that was food. So I made it out of there, got something to eat, just a snack from the things that I'd brought with me, and then I found a parking lot and took a nap. After waking up from the nap, it was decision time. I had to figure out what I was going to do with the rest of the day. I'd been watching the weather because we'd had quite a few storms rolling through, and my next stop on my trip was going to be Great Sand Dunes National Park. My intention was to go there and hike that evening, and then get up the next morning and do some sunrise hiking. So I left Mount Elbert and headed towards Great Sand Dune National Park. And again, just a really, really cool drive. Pulled into Great Sand Dune National Park that evening, and once again, I'm kind of in the same situation. I snapped a few images, but you could see off on the horizon, there were clouds rolling in. Looked at the weather, and they were giving rain that evening, and then rain the next morning. And the next morning was when I decided to leave. So at that point, I took all the photos I could take, finished up my roll of Portra 400, and made an executive decision to go ahead and head back towards Kentucky. I didn't see much use for me laying in the car that night and laying in the car the next morning if I wasn't going to be able to hike or do anything there anyway. And that's when I headed back towards Kentucky with 3 completed rolls of Portra 400 and a lifetime of memories. When I'm able to take trips like this, I'm so thankful. The ability to go and get away for a few days and to have these experiences are just so valuable. I really enjoy the time alone. I really enjoy the time being able to focus on the things that I enjoy: photography, creating, seeing new things, having new experiences. Just incredibly rewarding. And I made a video on the channel about the reasons why I quit photography a few years ago, and I'll take a look at that version of Isaac that was broken down and just lifeless. Every bit of happiness and joy had been kind of sucked out of my life. And I look back at that now, and I'm so thankful that I was able to persist and to keep on moving, to keep on doing things, and to keep on having these new experiences. Because there was a moment then where I couldn't see it, that I couldn't ever imagine going and having a big trip like this and doing it by myself. But getting back to the place where I can go and have these experiences and do these things, even if I'm doing them by myself, is like kind of the completion of my character arc, so to speak. Like it's really, really rewarding. And I think trips like this, at least for me, they're very important. And trips like this are just very important to me. Being able to go on these trips and have these experiences is super important to me. So if I could offer any advice to you, do the thing. Take the trip, take the ride. You're not going to get that many opportunities. I only get so many we only get so many weeks of vacation a year. Use them. Your work will be there forever, and it'll continue long after you're gone. Guys, if you thought this video was cool, check out my main trip or my Route 66 trip. And if you like the content that I'm making, subscribe. But as always, guys, thanks for watching.